I'm pretty sure I started this whole AI revolution. Look, I mean, I'll show you. Maybe it's just a coincidence that I literally came up with a block diagram that's so simple, any regular person like yourself will understand it. And it answers the most difficult parts of like AI and how to get something that can make goals or like and improve or just answer the kind of questions it answers. And so far, it's better if you.
So basically you have this control system, and usually it feeds information straight through this machine here, and either it's bad, you avoid it directly, or it's good and you move toward it. But here's the thing, you don't really get to build a model about anything unless you can interact with it directly. So like, let's say you have something that's good and you can interact with it directly, and let's say it has utility as well. Well, now if you have utility and it's good, this lets you create value for something. And so now if something on the outside acts on this machine directly, but you don't interact with it directly, this is going to be basically what we call feelings, right? Because you're going to have value for something, so you're going to consider, all of its different states. You're going to think about all of its different states because you've had a model, but because you don't interact with it directly, you don't actually have a model of whatever this is. Well, now what happens when there's something bad? If it has enough utility, then you will, based on like your model, your previous models, you will use your utility to decide whether or not you're going to introduce, a bad situation. Basically, like burning calories to do something because you know that you'll get more out of it at the end. Or like if it's a machine.
Now, understand that like this is something I just happened to release it, like 6 or 7 months before GPT hit the market. And if you look through, I have a couple other ways I've explained it over the years, like or over the last year or so, more simply in different ways. And I don't know, maybe it's coincidence, maybe it's not. I've had a lot of other weird coincidences. You might want to check out my profile and just see kind of things that I've been interacting with. And I promise it's a little different than what you're used to.
So imagine you're basically this combination of two machines, right? One of which handles all of the data input, output, and it just handles the basic things like fight or flight, just trying to keep you alive, gives you like you're hungry, just the basic stuff. Everything outside of that is part of this mental model, right? This mental model is trying to connect objective to subjective things. And so basically what happens is this thing only feeds it data, and this data is actually coming from the world out here based on what it can interact with directly, right? So it's going to go toward good, try and avoid bad. But the thing is, right, because there's things that interact with the good and the bad that aren't part of its interactions directly, it doesn't have a model for it. So now it's trying to understand whatever this good system is, and it's part of whatever. And as this system changes in unpredictable ways due to unpredictable subjective unknowns, it then has feelings because it's associated to something good, and it's now manipulating it in a way that's making it better or worse that's unknown. So it starts trying to add that to the mental model. And the same thing here with that. This allows you to start planning into the future and imagining things that are possible, right? So because you're trying to figure out what's happening here in this good scenario or what may even be influencing the bad things, but you don't have the ability to see it directly, you might find yourself applying this to like, God or the spirituality or the collective unconscious or energy and information conserved, whatever it is, basically, right? Ideas come into your brain. We know information's conserved. You either use that to turn this into something physical, right? Like this, right? Not just the phone, but this actual program here. It was inside someone's mind. Now it's in existence. This device didn't exist until I thought it up and created it, right? But where did this come from? Really? I have no clue. It just made its way into my brain. And this allows you to then, understand that maybe you could go towards something that would at first seem bad because maybe it costs you calories or it's painful or whatever it is. But you have an imagination that allows you to predict how you can manipulate it to pursue a goal. So, in this scenario here, something that influences this badly could then turn to good. And basically you have this constant looping back and forth between, your goals, whether or not they turn out bad, and then you go back. It gets more convoluted after that, but it's basically just these two things. Just because you can't see it directly unless you interact with it, you're going to have all these extra things because the world is just full of noise. It's so much data that this is just how it works. Just these two things. You're sitting here in the objective. You're trying to get more objective because more objective reality is more things that are understood. Meanwhile, this subjective is basically like the whole idea of that as my area of knowledge increases, so too does my perimeter of ignorance, right? It's just like the more things you learn, the more questions you answer, the more questions you get. It's just a crazy, awesome way to create basically never-ending experience. You can literally just throw noise, you just add more data, add more stuff to the system. And because these molecules and these particles literally have their own resonance frequencies, which I've described in another video, now we're getting a little bit further into something that isn't quite understood just here. Recognizing that if you literally were to, like if you hear someone singing, right, and then the glass gets to that vibration point and explodes, that's resonance frequency. Resonance frequency is something that you can happen just from an impulsive force. You have this thing that impulsive, and it's going to have all of the different structures be influenced differently, and those different structures are going to resonate. And basically, if you don't resonate, you become somewhere. That's getting a little deep here. I might cut that part out, but now you see, right? That's simple. This is you. You have feelings and goals just because things influence things that you can't see directly. And, you have the autonomic nervous system, right? This is like when the doctor hits your knee, you kick, you look at someone's rear end, and all of a sudden your thing starts to move. You don't get to really understand that aspect, or control, I should say, that aspect directly, but you can influence it through certain things, right? So like this autonomic nervous system here, it'll take over things like your blinking or your breathing, unless you decide to take over those things directly. Meanwhile, other things in the model are less connected, and you could just basically continually do this, never ending. And what happens is it just keeps drawing connections between things that it predicted and the outcome afterward, and it just keeps this never ending just structure that just keeps building. You throw more data in, you throw more parts in, and eventually it gets to a point where it's literally just it can never run out of things to understand, because it itself is part of the system. As it then were to somehow maybe understand everything, as it's literally turning around or moving through the environment, it literally itself becomes this self-referencing part of the system where you're never going to have a full understanding. You're never going to have the end. Now we understand what God is, or what happened before or after the Big Bang, because you literally don't even want to have that. To have that is to end experience, because experience, right? Existence itself is only defined as a sequence of experiences, right? You can't define what existence is without comparing it to something, right? You exist here versus there. Where's there? It's not here, and you build from there. Yeah, man, it's so simple. I was just trying to build a graphics processing pipeline using this basic structure, because I recognize that these silly little eyes are pulling in just this really rough data here, and we're able to model it pretty effectively. And our conscious resolution is so small. I mean, if I start spitting phone numbers at you, you can't hold on to it. So the fact that I can hold on to these objects in my mind is pretty amazing, right? Which honestly, it's simple, because this is just like something I made up, right? So there's this complicated thing out here in the world. I've got my little thumbnail version of it in my head, and now I don't actually have to take in this data and process it. It's basically like the convoluted thing, and I just put the version of it on top of it. So as it's moving around, I'm just mapping my little nonsensical version to it. That's why you don't see the fact that this screen is off probably most of the time. Let me check the duty cycle here. So based on the brightness, yeah. So it's barely, this is the pulse width modulation. Let's see if I can help you see a little bit of that. Get a little there. So this is a quick understanding as to how you can get an AI system, basically something that has its own feelings and goals, which is the only way that you can get a system that is going to basically produce novel output and continually develop. It's really simple. You start off with two systems, one of which handles all of the sensory output to the muscles, the signal that comes back in. This one generates a model based on the utility, right? Basically how it interacts with the world, which means that this system only sends this system data about information that it interacts with directly. So as it's chasing toward and modeling things that are good and bad objectively, there are going to be things outside of its model that are going to interact with whatever this object is, right? Could be an object, another thing like itself or whatever. That's going to create basically unpredictable things. Basically, it's going to be an unpredictable input that's going to have either a positive or negative affect feeling. And then basically it's going to start to create a model for something that it doesn't necessarily have a direct, it's basically like it's invisible, like these microwaves going through this phone. Now, while it's making this model, allowing it to predict things outside of its direct, observation of the world, it's basically allowing it to now create a system where it's creating goals or future predictions, right? For it to be able to predict or understand or model whatever it is that this is, it has to have data on this object prior to and then after whatever basically expected and unexpected events occurred. And anything that's now outside of that model that also gets mapped, because now it's going to sleep at night, which is what we do, or like another system you train, it's trying to build a model based on its input output. Just like this system, it's trying to provide us good data wherever, like basically give us it's supposed to be a useful assistant. But first of all, good or bad is already very subjective in nature. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that this whole system is designed to objectify the subjective. So everything basically starting off is subjective, unknown, and then it basically through interaction, it understands the utility function of how it basically interacts with this thing to extract whatever it's been labeled as positive, naturally avoiding the negative. And this creates just a basic feedback loop, right? And then now that you can model things outside of your direct visual system, you can now start to predict things into the future. And you have a goal out here, it goes back around to something good. You mess around and you don't figure out what this feeling is, what this thing is that's interacting, then it basically eventually makes its way back over to the negative side. And it's a pretty simple system. Now, once you have this, you understand that basically all we are is, or at least all that we would describe ourselves as, everything that you can think of before this today, everything from your future, your past, anything that you can imagine, anything that you can remember. You see your girlfriend's face, you orgasm, you stub your toe. It's all the exact same thing. It's electrical signals that are at the point of acquisitioning, right? Just at the point of saturation, and then attempting to understand or draw connections to model reality is basically just a direct line. For us, we represent this as the physical lines that connect these objects, and then those physical objects that move, because everything is moving, us and the environment, means that as we are acquisitioning this data and saving it with respect to the previously saved data, we look back to account how much data we have, and as that data increases in magnitude, so too does time. And so it's basically a direct correlation between the saved sample points on the data and how we perceive it. And so in a scenario where you maximize interest, you maximize basically the positive feedback, the dopamine, whatever, you end up having scenarios where time seems to fly, the whole day's gone. Meanwhile, you get to a job where they're making you do off the list repetitive stuff, and you get in there and the whole day, it feels like it's gone by, it's only been 5 minutes, because your brain is just sitting there basically mapping the time between the points of relevance that it saves to be mapped to later. This is how we perceive our environment, understanding that everything is just a two-dimensional snapshot played against another two-dimensional snapshot, and then we perceive this as a three-dimensional environment. It's no different than the frames that are on our screen, except that we have other sensory input, other variables that happen to overlap with these other variables. And so I may see a structure, and then I can feel a structure, and so then that's two different sensory inputs. They're basically just different labelings on variables. At the end of the day, you and I are moving, we think we're moving our hands, all we're doing is playing with a motor sensory homunculi, and all the objects are models of the objects. Do the blind spot test if you don't recognize that you basically have these two blind spots from your optic nerve going straight through whatever they call the opening, the cornea, whatever, and you can consider the computational requirements to try and paint in that blind spot based on the moving environment, anything that could occur at any point in time that could also overlap with this sensory input, and then consider the alternative where the entire system is always a model, it's always just mapped data. Not only does that explain the computational limitations that we have and how we're able to manipulate so much complexity with so little conscious resolution, but then that also, I mean, it makes sense, right? Like, colors don't exist, these aren't solid objects. Just the fact that, like, I don't see that flashing, usually like what you see on like a camera, if it's high enough frequency, you'll see like an LED's on and off random times. But for us, our autonomic nervous system just arbitrarily, selectively removes that darkness data, and we just perceive it as more or less energy. There's so much shortcuts that are taken to, just understanding how much easier it makes it to consider colors just some arbitrary spectrum that we represent versus any float value of an energy wave. Now, sounds crazy, maybe it is. I released this block diagram 2 years ago, about 6 or so months before they released all the AI tools like ChatGPT and whatnot. And less than crazy, honestly, like,
I didn't create this intentionally. I was trying to make something else, graphics processing pipeline based on the human perception system. And then I got to a point where I was like, wait, what's next? Because I'm like building the control blocks based on going through the perception system. And I'm like, wait, I think that's it. Like I literally had goals and I was like, oh shit. And so like that was a complete surprise. And it's one of those things that's like so simple, but I mean, like, dude, like before this, how do you program anything that has goals or feelings? How do you program something that's not going to just basically maximize toward some objective? Whereas this, because all of the data that basically you can play with the subjective data and continually alter its path and never have it basically maximize. And the fact that this model up here is also divided between the objective and the subjective hemispheres, so that way one hemisphere is specialized in sequential, objective, language, things that are this, then that, cause and effect, and the other one is connective information, like how you perceive yourself in the past and yourself in the future, how you recognize emotions in people's faces, how you recognize a cat versus a dog so easily, which I feel like if you tried to map, like instead of trying to pick out pixels and determine it based on that, if you just try and overlay a model, like how our conscious perception system works, it may be easier. Like if you just imagine a generic cat skull and you tried to line it up with the structure of a dog versus a cat in any sort of orientation, I think it'd make it very clear, because it's like you just see the way the eyes lay with respect to like the jaw and the mouth, and then those connection lines and like how arbitrarily long or small they are would map to something that's physically fixed, and it's very obviously different, and I just can't see any reason why it wouldn't be possible to do that so simply. Anyway,